400 federal agents, helicopters over the Sonoran Desert, cadaver dogs, Bluetooth signal detection equipment hunting for a pacemaker signal inside an 84-year-old woman's chest. The same genetic genealogy technology that caught the Golden State Killer. Tens of thousands of tips. More than 3 weeks of the most intensive missing person search this country has seen in years. And they still do not have her. But here is what nobody in the mainstream media is saying out loud. The evidence in this case does not point outward toward a stranger hiding somewhere in the Arizona desert. When you lay every confirmed fact flat on a table, when you trace every behavioral pattern, every timeline detail, every forensic anomaly, the picture that emerges does not look like a random predator. It looks like someone who sat at a dinner table with Nancy Guthrie on the last night anyone confirmed she was safe, someone who drove her home, and someone who knew exactly which camera had no cloud backup, someone whose hands have been moving through that house for nearly 2 decades. And then there is Annie, Nancy's own daughter, married to that man for nearly 20 years, living 4 miles from the crime scene, whose car was impounded by federal investigators, whose home was searched 5, 6, possibly more times by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and Puma County Sheriff's deputies, whose behavioral patterns in the days and weeks following her mother's disappearance have raised questions that no press conference has answered. Before this video is over, you are going to understand exactly why investigators keep coming back to that household. Why journalists with 20 years of national criminal case experience are citing law enforcement sources pointing in one specific direction. Why the public clearance issued by Sheriff Nanos does not mean what most people think it means. And why the single most important piece of forensic evidence in this entire case is sitting in a laboratory in Florida right now, holding a truth that no alibi, no press conference, and no media narrative can change. Stay with me. Because what you are about to hear is not speculation. It is the timeline. It is the evidence. And it is the pattern that does not make sense no matter how many ways you try to explain it away. Before we talk about what happened, though, you need to understand who Nancy Guthrie is. Not as a headline, as a person. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She is a retired educator. She has lived in the same house in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona since 1985, 41 years in the same home. She has a pacemaker regulating her heart. She takes daily medication that she physically cannot miss without putting her life in serious danger. She is not wealthy, she is not powerful, she is not famous. But her daughter Savannah Guthrie is one of the most recognized names in American morning television, co-anchor of the Today Show on NBC. Annual salary publicly reported, and, as investigators later discovered, specifically searched for on Google from a device located in Tucson, Arizona, in December 2025, 2 months before the abduction. Someone was researching Savannah Guthrie's income before Nancy disappeared. Someone in the same city where Nancy lived. And someone who wanted to know exactly how much this family was worth, and exactly how much leverage an 84-year-old woman with a pacemaker and no cloud backup on her security cameras could generate. That is not random, that is calculation. And calculation requires a calculator, not a stranger. Someone who was already inside the equation. Now, let us talk about the night everything started, because the investigation is focused on February 1st. But the person who took Nancy Guthrie did not begin their work on February 1st. They began on January 23rd. 9 days before the abduction, a homeowner in the Catalina foothills neighborhood of Tucson posted a video to the Ring Neighbors application, the community security network where residents share footage of suspicious activity. The video showed a figure approaching a residential driveway late at night, not walking forward, not running, not stumbling, walking backward, slow, and measured, perfectly controlled reverse movement. Back flat toward the camera angle, chin tucked toward chest. Every single step deliberate. This person was not disoriented. This person understood exactly how a motion-activated camera works. Ring and Nest cameras are not running continuously. They are triggered by a passive infrared sensor that detects heat and movement. When the sensor activates, the device requires 1 to 2 seconds to wake up, adjust to available light, and establish a recording connection. When someone approaches walking forward, those first seconds capture their face closing in on the lens. Exactly the footage that identifies a person. When someone approaches walking backward, those first critical seconds record the back of a jacket. By the time the lens is fully active and recording clearly, the face is already inside the camera's blind angle. This is not instinct. This is research. This is someone who sat down and studied how consumer camera technology functions and built a method to defeat it using nothing but the geometry of a human body and a precise understanding of recording lag time. The house on January 23rd is 6.5 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home. Same neighborhood zone, same Catalina foothills geography, same dark sky ordinance, meaning almost no street lighting, deep, complete natural darkness, and the same visual conditions that would exist at the actual target location 9 days later. And the backpack this figure is wearing on January 23rd, an Ozark Trail 25-liter hiking backpack with distinctive reflective safety strips along the shoulder straps, is visually identical to the backpack worn by the intruder at Nancy Guthrie's front door on the morning of February 1st. Same bag, 6.5 miles away, 9 days earlier. In forensic geography, what this person chose on January 23rd is called buffer zone selection, a practice site far enough from the real target to avoid immediate connection if anything goes wrong, but close enough to replicate the exact environmental conditions of the actual location. He was not testing a random house. He was rehearsing the operation, running it in simulation. A dog barked that night. He fled, but he fled still walking backward and suppressing the most basic biological reflex a human being carries, the reflex to turn toward a sudden sound. Because he refused to let even one frame of his face reach that camera. That level of self-control under sudden pressure does not come from fear. It comes from someone who has already decided that being identified is not an acceptable outcome, someone with something very specific to protect. 9 days later, he arrived at Nancy Guthrie's home, and he did not walk backward. He walked forward, calmly, without hesitation. He already knew he was invisible. The community's own safety network had told him so. The platform designed to protect neighborhoods became his feedback loop, and that feedback confirmed he was ready. Now, we come to the evening of January 31st. The last night Nancy Guthrie was confirmed alive and safe, and this is where the investigation develops its first major fracture. Nancy Guthrie had dinner at her daughter Annie's home. Annie Guthrie, Nancy's daughter, who lives with her husband Tommaso Cioni approximately 4 miles from Nancy's house. The evening was described as routine, a family dinner, board games, the ordinary rhythm of people who love each other spending time together, the kind of evening that does not stay in memory because nothing about it seems like it will matter. And then the evening ended, and here is where the simple story stops being simple. Who drove Nancy home? That question sounds like it has an obvious answer. It does not. Multiple sources across multiple rounds of reporting have given multiple conflicting responses. Some accounts say Tommaso drove Nancy home alone. Some accounts say Annie drove her. Some accounts say both of them made the trip together. The story has shifted depending on who is telling it and when they are being asked. As of the time of this video, there is no single confirmed, consistent, publicly verified answer to the question of who was the last person to physically place Nancy Guthrie inside her home on the night of January 31st. In a criminal investigation, this is not a minor administrative confusion. The last confirmed person to see the victim alive is always the first person investigators examine. The account of what happened at that front door, who was present, who touched it, what was said, when the vehicle pulled away, that is foundational information, and it keeps changing. What is consistent across all reporting is the time. Nancy was confirmed safely inside her home at approximately 9:50 in the evening. At 1:47 in the morning, her Nest doorbell camera was manually disabled. That is 3 hours and 57 minutes. Call it 4 hours. And I want you to understand what 4 hours means when you live 10 minutes away. The person who drove Nancy home could have been back at their own residence by 10. By 11, the Catalina foothills would be silent, not quiet, silent. By midnight, the streets of that neighborhood are empty. By 1 in the morning, the darkness in a dark sky ordinance zone, no streetlights, no ambient light at all, is complete. 4 hours is enough time to drive home, sit in a quiet house, wait for the neighborhood to fall fully asleep, change clothes, put on a mask, pack a bag, drive back by a different route, park at a safe distance, walk to the house, and execute every step of an operation you already rehearsed 9 days earlier. 4 hours is not a tight window. 4 hours is an eternity. And in those 4 hours, no independently verified, forensically documented alibi for Tommaso Cioni has been made public. Not one. What exists is a household alibi, a spouse confirming a spouse's presence, 2 people who live together, who share a bed, who would confirm each other's whereabouts automatically, regardless of what actually occurred. And investigators have a specific term for this. They do not call it an alibi, they call it proximity. And experienced investigators know the difference between a confirmed alibi and 2 people in the same house saying they were together. At 1:47 in the morning on February 1st, the Nest doorbell camera at Nancy Guthrie's home was physically disabled. Not a power outage, not a technical malfunction. Manually, a gloved hand reached up and ripped the device from its mounting bracket. But before the physical connection was severed, Google's back-end servers had already pulled a final burst of residual data, the last frames the device captured before going dark. 44 seconds of footage that became the most analyzed recording in America. What those 44 seconds show is not what a stranger at an unfamiliar house looks like. Former federal agents and behavioral analysts who reviewed the footage publicly described the suspect's movement in very specific terms. He does not arrive at the camera. He arrives at a location he already knows. He walks directly to the exact position of the doorbell mount without scanning, without searching, without pausing to locate it. He knows where it is before he reaches the top step. He uses vegetation from Nancy Guthrie's own front yard, plants he either knew were there or accessed without any visible searching, to obstruct the lens before disabling it. And he moves the potted plant near the entrance with the ease of someone who has moved it before, not the careful, hesitant movement of someone touching an unfamiliar object in the dark, the casual, efficient movement of someone performing a familiar task. And then there is the tap. 2 light, rhythmic taps on the camera lens. This moment has been watched and analyzed many times by professionals. It is not a taunt. It is not a calculated gesture for the recording. It is the kind of habitual physical contact a person makes with an object that is part of their daily environment. The way a hand touches a kitchen counter while walking past it. The way fingers check a familiar railing on a staircase they have climbed thousands of times. The way a person's hand reaches for something without the brain issuing a specific instruction because the body already knows where it is. Body language specialists have a name for the behavioral state this type of movement reveals. They call it ownership behavior, a psychological condition in which the person does not experience themselves as an intruder. They experience themselves as someone with a legitimate right to be in that space. They do not move like someone committing a crime in a stranger's home. They move like someone performing a routine task in a familiar one. There was no forced entry, no broken glass, no damaged door frame, no marks from a crowbar or a pry tool. The intruder engaged the handle and the door opened. Either the door was unlocked at 2 in the morning in a residential neighborhood, or the person on that porch had a key. Now, ask yourself this question plainly. Who knew where every camera on that property was, positioned well enough to walk directly to them in the dark without searching? Who knew Nancy Guthrie did not have an active cloud subscription, thus making physical destruction of the camera equal to destroying all evidence? Who had the kind of subconscious muscle memory familiarity with that porch that produced that habitual tap? Who could open that front door without forcing it? Tommaso Cioni had been walking through Nancy Guthrie's front door for nearly 2 decades of marriage to her daughter. He helped with property maintenance. He ran errands. He was embedded in the daily logistics of her home, the layout of her porch, and the position of her cameras, the location of her plants. These were not unknowns to him. They were the background scenery of a life he had been part of for 20 years. And according to his own account to investigators, he was standing on that same porch approximately 4 hours before the camera was ripped from its mount. Now, let us talk about what happened after Nancy disappeared, because this is the part that truly does not make sense. And this is the part that investigators, journalists, and behavioral analysts keep coming back to. When someone you love goes missing, there is a specific pattern of behavior that emerges. It is not uniform. People grieve differently. People respond to crisis differently. But there are behavioral baselines. There are things that happen naturally when genuine panic and grief are driving a person, and there are things that happen when something else is driving them instead. In the days following Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, the public narrative around Annie and Tommaso was carefully controlled. Statements were released, appearances were managed. The family cooperated with investigators, surrendered phones, computers, and vehicles. They allowed multiple entries of their home. Sheriff Nanos publicly praised this cooperation. But cooperation is not the same as transparency. And the behavioral patterns emerging from that household in the weeks after the disappearance are the kind that experienced investigators do not ignore. Annie Guthrie's vehicle was impounded by investigators. The sheriff described vehicle processing as standard investigative practice. But here is what standard means in a criminal investigation. You do not impound a family member's vehicle in a stranger abduction case. You impound a vehicle when you have reason to believe it was used in the commission of a crime or when it may contain forensic evidence. Standard means the vehicle is evidence, not a formality, not a courtesy. Evidence. The family home was searched 5, 6, possibly more times by federal agents and county deputies. Federal agents were documented on camera, leaving the Cioni Guthrie residence carrying a brown paper grocery bag. Not a plastic evidence bag, a paper bag. Yet paper bags are used for biological evidence specifically, for material containing skin cells, sweat, saliva, hair, or blood. Because placing biological material in plastic traps, moisture which cultivates mold, which destroys DNA. Paper preserves the genetic signature all the way to the laboratory. The Federal Bureau of Investigation used a paper bag because whatever they removed from that house they believed was alive with biological evidence. And investigators kept coming back. Not once. Not twice. 5, 6 more times. In criminal investigations, you do not return to a location repeatedly unless that location keeps producing relevant evidence or unless there is an information gap that requires filling. You do not ask the same people the same questions multiple times unless those questions are producing inconsistent answers. Veteran investigative journalist Megan Kelly, who has been closely tracking this case, said publicly and directly that the reason investigators keep going back to Annie and Tommaso's home is because they are asking whether that household had anything to do with this. She said she does not understand why investigators would be repeatedly interviewing neighbors, specifically asking what kind of people Annie and Tommaso are, unless they are building something, a foundation, a profile, a case. You do not ask a neighborhood what kind of person someone is after you have already fully and genuinely eliminated them from your investigation. Then Ashley Banfield, a veteran investigative journalist with over 2 decades of experience covering criminal proceedings at the national level, reported on her podcast, citing a law enforcement source she specifically described as very connected and highly regarded, that Tommaso Cioni was a significant focus of the investigation. She was not speculating. She was not amplifying social media theories. She was reporting from a named source inside the active investigation who was willing to speak specifically about the direction the case was moving. That is not internet rumor. That is source journalism from a credentialed professional. And then Sheriff Chris Nanos held a press conference on February 16th and publicly cleared the entire Guthrie family, siblings, and spouses included. Then he called them 100% cooperative. He described them as victims, plain and simple. Every major outlet ran that as the end of the family angle. The internet declared Tommaso innocent. Case closed. Here is what you need to understand about how criminal investigations actually function. Cleared does not mean exonerated. Cleared does not mean the investigation has moved definitively away from a person. And cleared means that at this specific moment, with the current publicly confirmed evidence, there is not sufficient cause to formally name or charge a specific individual. Those are entirely different statements. In high-profile cases with the kind of national media saturation this investigation carries, publicly clearing individuals is frequently a tactical decision by investigators, not a factual declaration of innocence. When law enforcement officially announces that someone is not a suspect, the natural human response is to relax, to let the guard down, to stop being careful in ways they had been careful before, to contact someone they had been afraid to contact, to check something they had been afraid to check, to say something to someone they should not trust. to make a move they had been paralyzed from making. Clearing someone publicly is sometimes the opening of a trap, not the closing of an investigation. Now let us talk about the evidence that cannot be managed by press conferences or public clearances. Investigators collected DNA from inside Nancy Guthrie's home. DNA that does not belong to Nancy. DNA that does not belong to anyone known to have been there. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has confirmed 2 separate unmatched DNA profiles. One from a glove found on the roadside, less than 2 miles from the home. One from inside the house itself. They do not match each other. They do not match the family. They do not match anyone in the FBI's national database of 19 million profiles. 2 profiles, 2 locations, 2 people. Now, consider this. The intruder on that porch was wearing black nitrile gloves. Not leather tactical gloves. Not latex surgical gloves. Nitrile. The synthetic rubber gloves used in laboratories, food service, home repair, and mechanical work because they resist chemical degradation and provide fine motor sensitivity. A package of 100 nitrile gloves costs approximately $10. They are also the standard glove used in every biology laboratory in America. Tommaso Cioni teaches advanced placement biology at a charter school in Tucson. He has taught there for over 15 years. His students handle specimens, dissection materials, chemicals, and biological samples. A box of black nitrile gloves is not a suspicious item in his home. It is expected professional equipment that any biology teacher would have on hand. That ordinariness is precisely what makes it significant. When a black nitrile glove is found discarded along a road less than 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home, along a route consistent with a post-crime exit, and federal agents simultaneously remove a paper bag of biological evidence from the home of the advanced placement biology teacher, who was at that same address 4 hours before the crime was committed. The ordinariness of those gloves stops being a defense. It becomes a connection. And here is the detail that should concern anyone who has been following this case closely. The DNA found inside Nancy Guthrie's home does not match any family member. The 2 separate profiles do not match each other. They do not match anyone in any national database. If Tommaso was physically present during the abduction and his DNA was not found, there are specific explanations for that. Though he is someone who teaches biology and understands genetic evidence and how to avoid leaving it, that is not speculation about his guilt. That is simply a factual observation about his professional knowledge base. A man who spends 15 years teaching students how biological samples are collected, processed, and analyzed understands what investigators look for and where they look for it. Let us talk about the gear. Maybe because how you interpret what this suspect was wearing determines a great deal about which direction you believe this case points. A ski mask costing $22 from a sporting goods store. In Tucson, Arizona, a desert city where it does not snow. A belly band holster designed to sit against the skin beneath clothing, but strapped over a thick jacket instead, hanging loose, completely non-functional as a weapon retention device. And an Ozark Trail backpack with reflective safety strips on the shoulder straps that illuminate brightly under infrared light. Black nitrile gloves. Total cost of the entire kit under $100. A former Secret Service agent reviewed the footage and stated plainly that no person with even a single day of tactical training wears a firearm that way. The reflective backpack, he said, was the equivalent of wearing a high-visibility vest in a dark environment. Now here is the argument you hear most often from people who believe Tommaso Cioni is uninvolved. He is an advanced placement biology teacher with a master's degree. He is methodical. He thinks in systems. A man that intelligent does not show up to commit the most important and dangerous action of his life, wearing gear that a teenager would reject as too cheap and too obvious. That argument sounds compelling on its surface. Now, flip it completely. If you are a science teacher, someone who plans before acting, who understands cause and effect at a professional level, and you are designing something you absolutely cannot afford to have traced back to you, what is the single most critical objective? You need investigators and profilers to build a description of someone who is not you. If you arrive in professional tactical gear, high-quality equipment, properly worn, efficiently used, investigators immediately narrow their search to someone trained, resourced, and organized. That profile eventually circles back to someone methodical, someone who thinks in systems, someone professional. But if you arrive in a $22 mask with a holster on backward and a backpack that glows in infrared, those same profilers say they are looking for someone impulsive, under-resourced, and desperate. And the attention moves away from the science teacher who had dinner with the victim 4 hours earlier. Criminal psychologists call this calculated incompetence. Does deliberate staging, not hiding your face behind a mask, hiding your intelligence behind a costume of deliberate stupidity. The cheap gear is not evidence of innocence. It may be the most sophisticated element of the entire operation. The belly band was not a mistake. It was a prop. The reflective strips were not an oversight. They were a costume. And wearing them required accepting a calculated risk because the designer of this operation believed the investigators would stop at the surface and never look underneath it. Now, let us talk about something that has received far less attention than it deserves. In February 2024, exactly 12 months before Nancy Guthrie was taken, Savannah Guthrie published a memoir. In it, she described a childhood family tradition called the kidnapping game. Every summer, a family member would wake Savannah and her sister Annie before dawn and drive them from Tucson to Phoenix without telling their mother. Along the way, the girls would call Nancy, and Nancy would play along, acting horrified, promising to rescue them. A kidnapping game from that same Tucson house, with the same Annie who now lives with Tommaso Cioni, and Nancy performing the role of the desperate mother who would do anything to get her family back. And that book was available for purchase on Amazon for 2 years before February 1st, 2026. Anyone researching this family could have read it. 1 year after it was published, the game became real, and connect that to this. Someone in Tucson, Arizona, Googled Savannah Guthrie's NBC salary in December 2025, 2 months before the crime. The $6 million ransom demand did not come from guesswork. It came from someone who understood the financial architecture of this family. Someone who knew what Savannah earned, understood what leverage looked like against that number, and chose a figure that was painful but theoretically achievable. An outsider guesses, an insider calculates. And someone who has been embedded in this family for nearly 20 years has had a very long time to understand both its finances and its history. There is one more layer to this investigation that deserves serious attention. Tommaso Cioni plays bass in a local Tucson band. One of his bandmates has prior felony charges including burglary, robbery, theft, and embezzlement. Burglary and robbery by legal definition require entering a property that does not belong to you and taking something from the people inside it. They require a specific operational and psychological threshold that most people never cross. The Puma County Sheriff has publicly confirmed that accomplice involvement has not been ruled out. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has confirmed 2 separate unmatched DNA profiles from 2 different locations. If those 2 profiles belong to 2 different people, and the mathematics of the evidence strongly suggests they do, then someone planned this and someone else executed it. If Tommaso was involved in an organizational capacity, he's providing intelligence rather than appearing in frame himself, the risk profile changes dramatically. He never shows up on camera. He never puts himself inside the crime scene. He provides the information, the camera positions, the cloud subscription gap, the entry point, the schedule, the floor plan, and someone else acts on it. That is a completely different kind of involvement. One that keeps you invisible. One that keeps your DNA out of a house. One that gives you a genuine alibi in the sense that you were never physically there at all. 2 profiles, 2 locations. The sheriff has not ruled out 2 people. And then there is January 23rd, the rehearsal night. For the first weeks of this investigation, everything was anchored to one window. February 1st, 9:50 in the evening to 1:47 in the morning. Any suspect who planned the crime had time to build a defense around that single night. Leave your phone at home. That's park your car in the driveway. Create a digital record that places you somewhere else. January 23rd destroyed that strategy entirely. The dress rehearsal was a random Tuesday night 9 days before the crime. The suspect did not know a dog would bark, did not know the footage would be posted to the neighborhood application, did not know that investigators would eventually link that night to February 1st. he believed he was invisible. Which means his phone was almost certainly in his pocket that night, registered to his name, pinging cell towers every few minutes. Building a digital trail he had absolutely no reason to disguise because he had no way of knowing anyone would ever look at it. Investigators executing what is called a tower dump are pulling records from every cell tower covering the January 23rd location between 1 and 3 in the morning. They are then overlaying that data against every device detected near Nancy Guthrie's home on February 1st. They are looking for the one phone number, one device that appears in both data sets. 2 nights, 2 locations, 9 days apart. You can construct an alibi for the night you knew was coming. You cannot retroactively construct one for a random Tuesday you did not know was being investigated. The mask hid his face on February 1st. Nothing hides the signal that was pinging from a pocket on January 23rd, on a night the suspect thought nobody was watching. Let us lay the complete picture flat and look at it directly. Who, by name, by confirmed relationship, by verified fact, had all of the following simultaneously: knowledge of Nancy Guthrie's home layout, porch configuration, and camera positions deep enough to produce subconscious ownership behavior on surveillance footage. That's knowledge that her Nest cameras had no active cloud subscription, making physical destruction of the device equal to destroying all evidence. Access to black nitrile gloves as routine professional equipment. A 10-minute drive to the crime scene. A 4-hour window on the night of the crime with no confirmed independent alibi. A confirmed presence at the crime scene address 4 hours before the crime. A financial context involving a significant gap between household income and the assets surrounding a famous family member. Knowledge of a published family memoir describing kidnapping games from the same address. Available for 2 full years before the crime. A close social connection to an individual with prior felony convictions specifically for crimes involving unauthorized entry. And now, a second date, January 23rd, for which no alibi was ever thought necessary to construct. That is not a list of coincidences. That is a profile. And here is what matters most. The forensic machinery does not care about press conferences. It does not respond to public clearances. It does not negotiate with media narratives or legal strategy. The 2 unmatched DNA profiles are being run through genetic genealogy databases right now. The same science that identified the Golden State Killer. Forensic genealogists are building family trees from partial DNA matches, A's tracing every branch until they converge on a specific name. The cell tower data from January 23rd is being overlaid against February 1st, hunting for the one device that appears in both locations on both nights. The paper bag removed from the Cioni Guthrie home is in a federal laboratory, its contents being compared against every biological profile relevant to this case. The DNA does not change its story. It holds whatever truth was pressed into a glove lining and against a door frame in the dark at 2 in the morning, and that truth is closer to the surface than most people realize. When it comes, one of 2 things happens. Every thread we trace crystallizes into a pattern that was always pointing in one direction, and the question stops being who. It becomes how anyone allowed this to happen to Nancy Guthrie, or it dissolves entirely. And a predator who is still out there watches the world finally realize it was looking at the wrong person the entire time. Either way, the answer is coming. The science does not stall. It does not respond to press releases. It follows the biology wherever the biology leads. And somewhere right now, an 84-year-old woman with a pacemaker and no medication is waiting. Someone connected to this investigation knows exactly what happened on the evening of January 31st. See whether that person is a stranger that no one has found yet, or the person who drove Nancy home, watched her go inside, and came back 4 hours later. That is the question that will define this case, and the laboratory in Florida is closer to answering it every single day. Share this video. Keep Nancy Guthrie's name visible. The more people who understand what the evidence actually shows, the more pressure on everyone involved. And if you have any information, real, specific, it's actionable information. The Federal Bureau of Investigation tip line is 1-800-CALL Federal Bureau of Investigation. The combined reward is over $200,000 for information leading to her safe return. Nancy Ellen Guthrie, 84 years old, 5 feet 5 inches tall, 150 pounds, brown hair, blue eyes, pacemaker, daily heart medication. Last confirmed seen on the evening of January 31st, 2026, in Catalina Foothills, Arizona. We will not stop until she is found.